a little disappointed that we weren't capturing that musical prelude in the recording of today's meeting, but welcome everyone to what is the fourth and final of our facilitation training series. It's kind of incredible how quickly this has flown by. It's been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot alongside you putting this together and kind of adapting. So we're going to talk about that today, actually, learning from practice and starting to look ahead a little bit as facilitative leaders. And I also just want to take a moment to encourage everybody to follow my example for a second. Let's take a deep breath in. Let it out. One more time, deep breath in. Let it out. We're all coming in today with a lot going on outside in the world, inside ourselves, regardless of where we stand, and just giving some space to honor that. Yeah, we're coming in to, sometimes we have to facilitate in moments in a community or moments in history that I think have to be acknowledged. Otherwise it feels false that when you're in a room with people. And I took a note of that as I was thinking and reading the news earlier this morning. Just holding the space for difficulty is something that a facilitator can do. And so, yeah, just naming the news that we're all sitting with in from the Supreme Court. And my fiance is a political reporter, so he's on his way to the Supreme Court right now, which I'm not too enthusiastic about either. But that is neither here nor there. And I'm also going to do my best to be present with you all today, because I'm really excited about how we're going to land this arc. You can see where we've come from, thinking about what is facilitation, doing some deep critical thinking about what is this perspective in the first place? Introducing some tools, really a barrage of tools is probably how it felt, which was more or less how it's intended. Just here's everything you need. We talked a little bit last time about how we can use appreciative inquiry as some connective tissue in terms of how we approach facilitation. And today we're going to talk about learning from practice. And before even giving any more preamble, I want to start with the agenda very quickly. We're going to do a quick check-in and turn to your neighbor. Then we're going to have a little dialogue around lessons from the field being your lived experience with facilitation. So anything that we've tried is going to be the topic of conversation there. I'm going to wrap up the kind of presentational part of this with some facilitation loose ends, some topics that have come up at various points that we haven't touched on yet, some things that we initially had outlined that just kind of didn't fit at various points. So we'll get to a few different things there before closing with some thinking ahead as individual facilitative leaders and as a community of facilitative leaders. What does this mean? And where do we take it from here? Before some feedback and close. But before getting into the next step, as always, anyone from the Community Foundation would like to, any announcements or words before we start?
We just really appreciate everyone who has committed their time to this, and we hope you've gotten something out of it. I certainly have. You know, give us your feedback. Keep giving us those workshop topics you want so that we can know where to turn. Thank you.
And I would just echo that and say thanks to everyone for their participation. And I feel like we've been talking about doing this training in some shape or form for many, many years. So Nate, we're grateful for you that you were able to bring your wisdom and your experience to us in both English and in Spanish. And I'm really excited about kind of the next steps we take as a community around facilitation. So thank you.
Yeah, I get the sense from both groups that this is just the start. So whatever that means, it's just the start of something. So with that, let's get started. And I'm going to send you into Mentimeter once again. You should be fairly familiar with this at this point. And I'm going to do the switcheroo. I know you can't see it. It's going to pop up in a second again. Here you go. Oh, no, not there. There we go. And now, of course, it stopped. Hold on, folks. Apologies. There we go. So you can see the code and the QR, whatever your preference is. I'm going to type in again in case anybody prefers to just copy paste. And we'll get started today with something we've gotten used to over the past couple of meetings. Like I said, at some point, having some rituals and some familiar tools is helpful as you're facilitating and for a group. So which figure in the tree are you today as you're getting into Mentimeter? Got Friday. Yep, somebody's feeling good on a Friday there. That's great to see. We've got some folks feeling a little less energetic, maybe someone more guarded, doing our best to climb up. Anybody want to share on what you're seeing or why you clicked on which figure you did this morning? I'll also echo Phyllis in just saying that any of these figures are awake and that you're all here and attentive at 9 a.m. on a Friday. I appreciate. So any of the wakeful figures.
I can share. So
Thanks,
last Friday, the same thing happened to me. I feel like Fridays I'm hustling and I'm trying to get things done, and I couldn't find one that was hustling. So that's why I picked 7, because it felt like he was climbing up and trying to get some stuff done, but nobody was like juggling, balls up in the air.
Yeah, this isn't a fully comprehensive group that we have here, but yeah, I appreciate that. At least striving, working hard. So thanks. I appreciate you adding this to the things you're juggling, Victoria. Anyone else? Katie, yeah.
Fucking Shadow, yeah.
Sharon.
Last week I was number 18 and I was like, yeah, like feeling really good. And now today I'm 13. But it's nice to see like the person who chose close to the top and these other ones. It's a bit aspirational for me. I'm just so drained from this week, which is really different from last week. But everyone else's mood seeing this kind of makes me a bit, just my mood is lifted. And it made me smile to see the people who chose the guy who's the little character who's just smiling and open arms. So that I'm excited to talk to you guys.
That's great to hear, Katie. And yeah, there's some, I mean, we're literally, this is the community we've been talking about, right? This is the sense of solidarity that, oh, okay, well, at least if some of the people in my group are feeling a little better, maybe I can draw some energy from them. Sharon, how about you? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, I picked number 9 because I'm kind of just holding on by my blanket, and I wish he had his thumb in his mouth too. I just kind of feel, I'm glad it's Friday. I don't like what's going on in the world, but I'm here and I'm going to hold on and do what I can.
I appreciate that. I'm feeling part of that in myself as well. And also just echoing everybody and being grateful that it's Friday. So let's lean into that and keep moving. I think, is that the only Mentimeter that I have for now? I believe it is. Yes, because that is for later. All right. So first, of course, before we go any further, I'd like to do a quick check-in just individually. Remember, feel free to share just kind of how are you doing this morning? You don't need to respond, go into detail if you don't want to, or why you shared what you shared. And most importantly, one takeaway you have from this training. And like I keep reminding, it doesn't have to be something that I put on a slide. It can be something someone mentioned, a comment in the chat, whatever. So I'm going to give you just 2 minutes very quickly to go into breakout rooms. You'll be in pairs. Okay. Mostly pairs. One trio, I believe. We'll see. Any questions about this before I put you into these rooms? Okay, I'll see you in 2 minutes. Perfect. Anyone who'd like to share, focusing on that second part of any takeaways? Heather, I don't know if you unmuted intentionally, but it's always dangerous to be unmuted. Okay. Anyone want to jump in, either with your own thing or something you heard from someone else? Yeah, Jill.
I'll share. So I was paired with Phyllis, which was great to talk to her. And we talked about feeling drained over the week, but also the kind of empowerment that comes from reaching out to community and just like holding space for like the news of today and you know, checking in on people we care about and just kind of being in the moment together. My little blurb was the one like comforting another, which was just kind of my feeling this morning of reaching out to folks. And then one takeaway that we both shared was feeling like we want more facilitation training after this, and how this kind of gave us like a toe in the water, I think Phyllis said. And then we were both feeling like we want to kind of maybe immerse ourselves in the facilitation world a little bit more.
Cool, that's exciting to hear. And we can definitely stay in touch about ways to do that. You facilitate being one of the ways, which we can talk about. Thank you for sharing that, Jill. Anyone else? Christina.
I mean, I'll echo that, Nate. I really appreciate this training. And I was just recently in a meeting, and the whole time I was like thinking about all the tools that you've given us and how I wish they were being employed and that they weren't. And so, I really appreciate this training a lot.
Thanks for that, Christina. And that can be one, I guess, potential downside of having a facilitative perspective is attending meetings that are not being very thoughtfully facilitated. But I think facilitative leadership is also, it's about leading from behind. So it's also about how can I intervene with my questions and with my energy and things like that, like being more active, I think, as well. But thank you for sharing that, Christina. Anyone else? Don't have to hold this space for too long, but any other takeaways, Katie?
So yesterday I was in a meeting. So I work with Sierra Business Council under the Sierra Nevada Energy Watch program. I won't throw anybody under the bus or any jurisdiction, but I had a meeting. I was meeting two gentlemen for the first time, and it's like a project that wasn't really a self-starter. And I wanted to like bring life back into it. So I did your exercise. They weren't super receptive, but I was really proud of myself for doing it. I did the, when you imagine blank at its best, what do you see? Because I had an image, like I had an answer that I wanted them to say and they didn't say it, which was okay. But I did gain more insight into what they wanted, which doesn't fall into the scope of my work, but it was really good to know to use it.
That is amazing to hear, Katie, and you are one step ahead. We're going to be talking about, I can't wait to hear more about that experience in just a second. I also want to thank you for the way that you framed and kind of your vulnerability in sharing that you wanted a particular answer, and they didn't do that, but they gave you other information that kind of opened your eyes to maybe not something you have jurisdiction over, but maybe the real problem, or maybe, and that's what happens when we hold space, is we're not leading with our agenda and setting with our assumptions and our expectations. We're opening the space for co-creating what it means. What are we doing here? So I appreciate that. That's a valuable lesson, I think. Anyone else before I move on? Because we are going to get into reflecting a little bit more about our personal experiences. So Katie's provided us with a good transition. First, just want to check in on these agreements. Things seem to be going pretty well from where I'm sitting in the workshop, but anything to add in our last session?
I
Cool.
would like to say something, and Allison probably knows this one, but one that I really like, and not necessarily that we need to add it, but just to keep in mind, is take care of your own needs. So it kind of opens up, especially in Zoom, you know, we all have lives behind the camera and the screen. So I always like seeing it in there. Take care of your own needs.
I like that a lot. Thank you for bringing that up, Victoria. And that's also, that's a great perspective on this. Remember that we're taking a meta look at the meeting too. So it's not just what we need for this meeting, but are there any other group agreements or expectations that people have found useful like that we don't have represented here? Cool, no problem, John. All right. Let's spend some time unpacking and learning from your real world experiences, the kinds of things like Katie described, something that doesn't go as expected, something that isn't particularly well received is absolutely the best way to learn about something, which is something else we could talk about in a future training, just kind of the learning loops and open-mindedness and how we can kind of be mindful about our own learning and how we react to failure and fear and shame and all of those things that come with being in public and speaking in front of people and having people react to us. So what we're going to do, like Phyllis and Jill framed it, we're just dipping our toes in a little bit here. Not we won't have the full immersion into that. But I am going to put you into groups of 3, and we'll take about 10 minutes to share about, and I know I put experiments in quotation marks because we didn't frame experiments. I haven't assigned anything. We haven't, we haven't had a template for what you're supposed to be doing. But I think anything that we're trying out is an experiment. What Katie described in terms of using appreciative inquiry for framing was a great facilitation experiment. So that's what I'm talking about here. So what I'd like to hear about and for you to share in your groups is, first, what was the new facilitative approach or technique you tried? What were you hoping to achieve? It could be a full-blown technique, a methodology, or maybe it was just, oh, I did the agenda this way, or whatever. How did it go? And what would you do differently next time? Those are my 3 buckets of questions. Any questions about the next 10 minutes? All right, I'm going to recreate the rooms, 3 participants per room. And I will see you all to share and hear a little bit more, which I'm really excited to do in 10 minutes. Surprising, it's a pretty chill song otherwise. I'd love to hear from anybody, especially, I mean, the whole experience, but I want to focus on what would you do differently next time? Let's use our time as much as possible to focus on the lessons. What would we do differently? if anybody wants to share. Or Katie, if you want to round out the rest of your story that you've teed up for
I
us.
guess, yeah, a question that came up, because we kind of deducted, like I came in with one objective, and it seemed as though the meeting participants came in with another objective, and we were curious what your advice or thoughts would be on like how to kind of steer that meeting back, and like kind of rein it back in of like, okay, how can we have this middle ground? And that's what I tried to do with that question, but that was something that we talked about that I'm not really sure how I would have done it differently.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. A couple of suggestions, and I think you basically just said it yourself. If you and the participants are coming in with different objectives, both before, so this is what you would do differently next time, confirm those objectives. What are your expectations of this meeting? What do you guys want out of this? That could be a one question Google form, that could be an email, or it could just be like a little sample with one person. Maybe you don't have the relationship with the whole group to do that, but it's just kind of a check-in with a representative of that group. You can also do that at the beginning of a meeting. So right at the beginning, here are my objectives, and you have that on a slide, and you open it up. How does this look? Does this meet with yours? And then at the very least, you have been transparent with your objectives, and so they can fight against them if they want to, which is always a chance, but usually people go along with them because you're telling them, here's what I'm hoping to accomplish, and you can work in whatever they're hoping to as well, or tabling it.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's very simple. I just
Totally.
overthought it.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that is, like I keep reminding folks, facilitative, easy. It's a lot of this is just kind of slowing down and being intentional about things. Lizzie, what was your experience?
So I use the tool, which I think is the easiest tool that you have shared. And that was when I was quiet while I waited for the people in the meeting to speak up. But after a few seconds, I decided to be really clear that I was just going to wait until they spoke up. Kind of like you said, you're going to get uncomfortable before I do. I think I felt pretty uncomfortable, but I was just going to sit there and count or something. But something to do differently, and I don't know how to do this at all unless you kind of know ahead of time this hierarchy of a meeting. So kind of organically, the person who you could probably say is at the higher end of that hierarchy spoke up first, which then could have, swayed the opinions or potential feedback of the other people who are definitely not just at that same point in their career and experience wise. But I don't know how I could have handled that differently because I wanted their insight. I just don't want it to sway the other people in the meeting's perspective.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very familiar parable that a lot of us have encountered. So a couple of things. One would be, and I think I mentioned this, and actually this is, so I'm going to kind of seamlessly transition this into the facilitation loose ends and dialogue, because we're gonna catch a lot of these topics and continue just asking questions and talking while I present some of them. But I'm pulling this up from last week, and it's in the second page of the facilitation tips and tricks. The naming and bringing power dynamics into the room is a superpower of the facilitator. And it can be just as simple as putting a line in the group agreements or the norms or whatever, when you do that at the beginning. Something about be mindful of authority and privilege, or something in creating space. Something else, if you're working with leaders consistently, and obviously this is relationship dependent and context dependent, but a lot of times I pose it one-on-one with that leader as kind of a, hey, could you help me out in the next meeting, and pause for, I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 other people, and like help you hear from 2 or 3 other people. and frame it as we're doing this together, not as a corrective. You know, like that might work. That's worked with some people, but I think that putting it in the norms, you know, there's only so much you can do to break down the culture of a group. If it's a department or an organization or something like that, that can be tricky. Yeah, and takes time.
That's a good point. That I know you, that was one of the tricks, was to say, that was my question last time about how often to go over norms. That this person is a part of the group but doesn't attend regularly and had been invited. So it would have been a good opportunity to go over those in the beginning of the meeting.
That's
for that reason.
That's
Yeah.
a perfect case study of why to do norms, is because you're going to get randos sometimes, and they're unaccounted for. Even in virtual meetings, it happens. And so, yeah, it's a reminder of, here's what we've been building here. Here's the kind of space that we've been establishing here. And it's really, you're entering into this space, regardless of where you are in the hierarchy. Cool, thank you for that, Lizzie. Anyone else? Either something that's coming up. I have a few more slides, like I said, some of the loose ends, but we can spend some time in this conversation too, if anybody else would like to share. Cool. I'm not going to hold a space until someone feels more awkward than me. You don't always have to do that. So let's just let's keep building this conversation. So a few topics in the kind of facilitative odds and ends bucket that have been on my list, which is not to say that they are not just as important as anything else that we've been discussing, just different elements. First is around facilitating inclusion and equity, and facilitating with an inclusive and equitable lens. This entails a lot of different things. I mean, what the issue that Lizzie was just raising about hierarchies and who speaks most, and I mean that's getting into this territory. And so the same tools and the tools of participation and inclusion that we're developing, all the liberating structures are in one way or another are that help us with this. That's really the theme of the way I look at facilitation, is how are we getting more voices participating more thoughtfully. So a few tips in terms of accessibility in language, in hearing ability. This is a good space to use the tech tools that we have, including, so when I say Zoom translation, there's not a good translation function in Zoom, but there is an interpretation plugin that some of you might have seen. So it's where you basically just have an interpretation channel, and this requires a dedicated translator during the meeting, which is my biggest point to every group, is that really inclusion and facilitating inclusion, creating spaces that are inclusive and equitable, require investments, and being mindful and accepting of that is I think something that we should embrace more. I know we don't embrace new expenditures, period, but I'm thinking of another client, and I might have even mentioned this, where we're really kind of bootstrapping a collective impact initiative. And a large part of the community where we're working is Latino and Spanish speaking. And it's just the kind of coordinator of the initiative and myself who are bilingual, who are leading this. And so to make the meetings accessible, I'm translating in chat during meetings so that the Spanish speaking participants can be reading along and following along. And we've kind of established a rapport and a way of making that work, but that's not ideal. That's obviously not that's not equitable. by any means, but I'm also not a professional translator, so I can't do the simultaneous thing on the channel. So that's a perfect, to me, a perfect example of accessibility and inclusion requires investment, thoughtful investment in how are we making this more accessible for folks. I just keep using the same words. We can also use in Zoom the I think, what do they call it in here? The not the live transcript. I think it is the live transcript. That is the captions for people who may be hard of hearing or in the deaf community. That is one thing that it does decently well, is capture English captions. It does not capture Spanish captions, as I have recently learned or attempted. The other thing, and this is pretty simple, is doing bilingual slides. Just side by side, I put, it depends on the crowd, which comes first, English or Spanish, but English first, and then in italics right after, or after a slash, the translation in Spanish. And so it's just side by side, the same information. It's not as pretty of a presentation, but that's not the priority. The priority is having the same access to the same information at the same time. And that applies, I know, just from the way we're doing this training, that there is a large Spanish speaking community in the Tahoe Truckee area. But obviously there are other language needs as well, beyond just Spanish. So thinking about that. One thing, so moving to the second point, because I'm not sure about your area, but people are starting to be more in person again. Again, investing in translation, but also thinking about how you're giving equal time to different groups in the room with your attention. It sounds implicit and kind of, again, simple, but this same group, the same community where we're doing collective impact, we did an event in February that was the whole group. And so we had all the English speaking county folks and a few other nonprofits, and we had several Spanish speaking community members. And so we were doing a dual kind of simultaneous translation presentation at the beginning. And it was surprising to me that people came up to me afterward to say how much they appreciated that I would walk toward the Spanish speaking tables as I was speaking in Spanish, that I was like trying to engage equally, being mindful that there are multiple audiences, that everyone is here. So not just standing in one part of the room, but even moving toward, giving more attention to the folks who don't get attention. We have that capacity as the facilitators. Allison, I see your hand up.
So one of the things that Christine and I have been talking about is like, do we add a ground rule or a meeting agreement that kind of articulates what you just said? Like that we will ask for marginalized voices to be heard first or something like that, because I've noticed it more since we've been meeting virtually. Like there's definitely like a handful of folks who are used to speaking in meetings that will always jump in, or, we had an example a few months ago where we had a panel and like the white folks on the panel like just jumped in first and didn't allow a lot of time for the people of color on the panel. So like, I'm wondering if we can kind of front load that or kind of put that out there. And if so, how you would recommend doing that?
I think you absolutely can. And the recommendation that I would have about that is framing it about the responsibilities of the people in power, not about creating the space for the marginalized. So it's about what you're asking the white cis men in the room to do and the white folks generally. But so you can say, I think of a perfectly reasonable group agreement could be mindful of your privilege and taking up space. And you could even put in parentheses, e.g., race, gender, just kind of break it down for people to think about. And I know not everybody's coming in thinking about their identities and how they intersect with how they're showing up, but we can nudge them toward that a little bit. I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
But always, yeah, but as just a general rule, I think making it clear what you're expecting from the people who are in positions of power, rather than asking people who have relatively less power in that situation to take an action or do something. And I think that's actually a great transition to this last point. Remember, I keep showing that slide of always start with who. That's the first step. So partner with participants. This goes back to Katie reaching out to the people in her meeting to confirm beforehand, what are your expectations? What are your objectives here? It's the same with what are your needs and what are your what would make you feel most comfortable or most present. I was recently in doing an event, and a woman in the middle of the session, a Black woman, came up to me and asked if we had she didn't call it a safe space. She framed it as a comfort room, which I hadn't heard of before, but as a space aside from the plenary large room, just in case anybody needs to take a moment, or to, if anybody's triggered by anything or anything's coming up. And going forward, that's something that I at least will consider, like being aware of where can I direct people if that does happen. And I wouldn't have known that if she hadn't told me. So talking with your participants and asking, what would make this more inclusive? What would make this feel more like your place? Which I think is a good way of framing it. If this is our place, how can it feel more like your place? Kate.
Hi. One of the things that I find for myself in meetings is that I don't always understand. I don't always understand the conversation. I don't always understand the references or where the conversation is going. And what I find happens to me, and what I'm trying to be aware of when I am in a facilitative position, is to be able to say, that really sort of leave the space for questions, and that questions are expected and a part of what we're trying to incorporate here, to give permission for the not knowing to have a place. Otherwise, I think it's real, at least in my own experience, I check out and I get very nervous and I stop talking, because I'm pretty sure that that everybody else understands something that I don't, even though that may not be true. That's
I think most people are in that moment are feeling like you do. And yeah, I think what I was initially thinking as you started talking, Kate, is just how valuable your contribution is as somebody who says, hey, wait, what does that mean? Wait, where are we? That and those clarifying questions, that's helpful for everybody, because we're all building off the same information, but that we're not equally comfortable with assumptions and leading, getting to places. It's valuable to have people asking questions and checking in. So like Kate suggests, leaving space for that and really validating that, I think, is great. Anyone else have any kind of personal experience or tips from your own work in this area? Let me see if the next one. Okay, yeah. So this is kind of a good transition to, I threw in, and most of you are probably familiar with this spectrum in some form or another, but this is the public participation spectrum from the International Association of Public Participation. They put this together a few years ago. Basically moving from informing, where we're pushing out to our community, to consulting, where we want them to bring information to us, to involving, where we're kind of working one-on-one and getting some input, to collaborating, where we're going to them for advice and innovating on solutions, to empowerment, where they are fully in the decision-making seat. This is the full spectrum. And I think in general, we want to be moving as a society toward the right end of the spectrum. And so this is, I think, just a helpful tool to have in mind as we go into a meeting. Kind of, what's the level of participation I'm really looking for here? You know, I think, and I've heard in this group and in other groups that just by default, we go to the informing a lot of times because it's the easiest, right? And it's the one we're most comfortable with. I really like in this image, the way it frames this second row here, the promise you're making to the public. I think that's a very helpful way of thinking about this. So the promise with informed is we'll keep you informed. That's not a very inspired, when I hear that from anybody, I'm not particularly inspired. And each gets a little bit more, you know, I think we're all familiar more or less with what this, the implications of this spectrum. But to go back to that question that Kate kind of opened up for us, any other tips or tricks from your own experience about how we can create inclusive spaces and really be mindful about the spectrum of participation and where we are in it?
No,
I
I
know it's a
really
Friday
like
morning.
that.
Go
That's a
ahead,
super
Allison.
helpful
Yeah.
tool. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. It's really, really helpful.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's like I've said at a few different points, what I find most useful in facilitation are like frameworks, you know, just kind of simple heuristics to help me organize. Wait, where am I? What's going on here? And this, I think this is a helpful one. So everybody's always curious about the technological tools. What's the best tool? When a lot of my clients, that's the first question they ask, and it's where they spend the most time stressing. And I think I get where that comes from, but I think it always surprises me because a lot of times it's putting the tool before the use. You know, the cart, the horse before the cart before the horse. The horse is supposed to go first. It seems confused, and so my advice with technological tools is really to think critically about what are you trying to accomplish? What are the objectives? And start there. That will tell us, okay, we need a virtual meeting room. Maybe we need Zoom, or we need Hopin, or we need Google Hangout, or whatever. Because getting to this second point, who is my audience? What tech do they use? What's going to be most accessible and comfortable for them? I might have access to all the tech wizardry. I'm millennial, I'm comfortable in Google Slides and in the internet and making these things. I could throw so many different platforms at a group, but is that really in their best interest? Is that what they want? In a lot of cases, probably not. So being mindful about where are people already meeting? You know, like I'm doing an event next week where we were just deciding this morning, okay, which polling platform do we want to use between, so that's this middle icon, between Mentimeter or Slido. And I have a slight preference for Mentimeter, and I think it's only because it's the one I've used more, but they use Slido more. And so of course we should use Slido. Why would I complicate? We already have a tool for this function. Why would I introduce a new tool for this function? It's just, we're going to lose time in the meeting with people learning this tool when they could just be using it. And so the other tool here is on the right that I just kind of symbolized is the whiteboard. So we've used Jamboard at a couple of points in this training, but other people use Miro. There are a lot of different tools for these functions, and ultimately they're all products. And so I'm not really sponsoring or advocating for any of them in particular, just kind of giving some direction on how to go about it, and really remembering to think of in this human-centered approach, that before we get to the prototyping and the testing of the tool, what we're going to do, we really need to think deeply about what and it's, I'm just repeating myself at this point, but what are the needs of the people I'm designing this for? That said, we are using Zoom a lot, both at the moment, and I think just kind of as a sector and country, it seems like Zoom is where a lot of meetings are happening. So a few tips that I put together on getting the most from Zoom. In general, ask for video participation, it's nice to have the visual feedback. You know, I can see if people are nodding along. I can see if people, and I even appreciate, Kate, you put yours back on as with that little reminder. But also be understanding about why not. We're calling from home. We're calling from whatever. I mean, people are doing their best with a lot going on. And so there are plenty of legitimate reasons why people wouldn't want their cameras on. This, I think, is also a good opportunity to apply your equity lens. There are also plenty of reasons related to class or any other number of reasons why somebody might not want to be on camera, and why they, you know, maybe they're not technically confident in blurring their background to hide their messy room like I am. Just being mindful of that. With it being said that obviously being able to look at each other is preferable to not being able to look at each other. I think I mentioned this at some point in an earlier presentation, but you can assign different roles for the different Zoom functions. And so we have, what are the different functions we have here? We have chat, we have screen share, we have polls in some cases, we have breakout rooms. That can be a lot to manage all by yourself in one meeting. And so you can ask your coworkers to just play those roles. Coworkers or other participants in the meeting. Just ask for volunteers, preferably ahead of time, so that they can be familiar with the agenda and where they're doing it and where they'll be on call. But ask for help, because it can be a lot, especially, you know, I'm working with Zoom and I have Google Slides going at the same time, and we'll go to Mentimeter, and sometimes there's a Jamboard. It's a mess. So having help only makes it better. Use breakout rooms for participation. So be mindful about, you know, it's uncomfortable for most people, for almost all people, to speak in a larger group. It's more uncomfortable to speak in a larger group than it is to speak in a smaller group, is a pretty good rule of thumb. And so if we're looking to create participation and opportunities for people to speak, put them in small groups in the breakout rooms. That's what we would do in person. And so create opportunities for more people to talk, for more people to feel comfortable, and then you can bubble up to, and that's always the phrase that I use, bubble up to the plenary group. And for those of you who are interested in the Liberating Structures menu, that's really what the 1, 2, 4 all process is. It's just some guidance for how you bubble up from small groups to the plenary. And this is one that I've just noticed in myself recently. This is a reminder for me as much as anybody. If we're using waiting rooms or passwords with the Zoom rooms, keep an eye on who's in the waiting room, because and that's another role that you could assign, is keep an eye on allowing people into the meeting, because it's a bummer when somebody misses the first 5 or 10 minutes because I didn't see that they were there the whole time, because I've been focused on my slides and people's faces where I need to be focused. Any reactions to these Zoom tips, and or what other tips do you have for me and for the rest of the group about doing this virtual meeting stuff we're trying to do?
We've just been trying to allow for more breaks than we might in person, just so people, I just know, for myself, it's just hard to stare at the screen the whole time, or
totally.
So just allowing people opportunity to get up and move around and still being engaged.
Yep, great point. And that reminds me of that other point from, let's see, where is it? More frequency rather than more intensity. So just breaking up into smaller chunks is definitely better for all the reasons you mentioned. Sharon, I see your hand up, and then Devin.
Yeah, I actually kind of went through a training for when our board started first using Zoom. You could see there was a lot of confusion. Somebody's husband even was changing clothes in the background. And so the next meeting before we started, I said, okay, everybody go to this and you can see what you can do here and all of that. And it really helped. And I just assumed everybody knew how to use Zoom, but they didn't.
You're absolutely right. And it really depends on the group. I think even with this group, in the first couple of sessions, I included a slide about here's how to change your name, and you can do a screenshot and actually show people, here's how you do this. Here's how, and this is another in the topic of inclusion. That's how you can guide people to, here's how you change your name to include your pronouns. Here's how you change your name to include your organization, whatever information. People don't just know that. It's not intuitive. We all have it figured out at this point for the most part. But yeah, Sharon has a good point. But the only thing I would add is just you can even make slides. Just make it part of it, and then that's also a resource for them in the future if you share those slides. Devin, go ahead, and then Jill.
Well, hey, yeah, Allison kind of covered it with time and breaks, but don't make them too long. I know some people, and within their planning meetings, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like an hour and a half, that's a long meeting. Like more is less. Try to get to the point and be succinct, and don't really do long meetings. Is helpful.
Absolutely. I think just amen to that one is all we can say. Jill, were you raising your hand as well?
Yeah, I almost changed my mind because I didn't want to take up too much time because I feel like a lot of people know this, but we also like to do a practice Zoom with our team, and we'll just do like a, hey, who's available to hop on a quick like practice session so I can make sure that like I'm sharing the right slides and stuff. And then also shout out to Padlet that Christina and I have used as another tool. It seems to be super effective.
And Jill, what would you describe as the function of Padlet? What is that doing for us?
So it's similar to like Jamboard in that people can drop comments in, but I think it's even a little bit more intuitive, and it's you can create like columns instead of just like random sticky notes all over. So we've found it helpful.
Yeah, I've only recently started using it. I like that it's like it's like a wiki and a whiteboard at the same time, so you can organize things. And yeah, Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of just great practical tips. I think something I still struggle with is as far as participation, we have a large board, and we've gone back to meeting in person, but we've kept an online option. And so kind of doing these hybrid meetings, and it gets really hard, even though I feel like we try to turn to those that are on the screen and we have the big, TV with them there. I feel like it gets hard to still make sure those people feel like they're participating in the meeting and not just having the people in the room dominating conversation. So if you have just any tips or tips or tricks on that, would love to hear. It's just kind of a growing theme, I think, of where we are right now of this hybrid world.
I think that's the direction so many of us are headed, and it is so not an ideal direction. I mean, it is the more inclusive direction, and so it is kind of the, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together thing. It's frustrating to work in these hybrid contexts, but it is a pretty amazing innovation once we get it figured out. So a couple of things that occurred to me. The first is that I've found that it's almost more useful to have more people in the virtual than just one or two, so that you can almost have a parallel event, or at least have like conversations happening in the virtual space, and then you can be cross-pollinating between those two spaces, because you're exactly right that facilitating the conversation between one person who's on Zoom, or one or two people who are on Zoom, and a whole room of people who are in person, it's really tough. So that's one just kind of observation. And so maybe that's, you know, even kind of encouraging people that this is an option if you're, you know, kind of open, making that more available, because then, and then at that point, and another part of this is having someone else on your team who is on the Zoom. So kind of having an in-room facilitator and a Zoom facilitator. You have the same agenda, the same, I did the event that I was referring to earlier where the woman asked for the kind of chill out space. That I was leading the in-person version here in DC, and then two of my colleagues in Mexico and Kenya were facilitating the global virtual version. And we had mostly the same agendas. The times were different because we can tolerate being together more in person than we can looking at each other on screens like we've established. But for the most part, the flow was the same, and we had touch points between the two groups. So think of it that way. The other thing is you can use the polling tools, Mentimeter or Slido or whatever. It feels a little unnatural in the room because you're all there. So why would you use that? But it's to be more inclusive to the people who are virtual. And so that's a way to get their input and kind of open the door for them, you know, kind of leveling the playing field a little bit. But it is a challenge. And I also don't have it figured out yet.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm aware there's a new program. It was called Glimpse, and now it's called Twine for Breakout Rooms that allows you to kind of put pre-qualifiers on who you want to meet with in your breakout rooms. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think we still struggle with bilingual breakouts. And it sounds like you have experience in lots of different cultures and languages. And do you have any good tips for how to make that more inclusive?
So one thing that is a really easy hack is to ask everybody to include their language, their preferred language in their Zoom name. And so then when it comes time to sorting into breakout rooms, then you can do that just manually. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, you can also, I haven't done it this way, but you can pre-create breakout rooms. And so you could, you know, have breakout rooms like, let's say we have like 3 different topics that we're covering. You could say topic A, English, topic A, Spanish, topic B, English, topic B, Spanish, and just create spaces for, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. But I think that what I've personally done is just ask people to put their preferred language in parentheses, so then I can manually put them into breakout rooms. But it's good to know. I'll check out Glimpse and Twine because I'm not familiar with them.
Well, to be fair, Glimpse is no longer acquired by Twine. It's still in the beta phase, but they're hoping to launch it in by the end of the month.
Okay, well, that's good to know. We're on the cutting edge, folks. All right, so speaking of the cutting edge, we only have 15 minutes left of our time here. And so I want to transition into some of the forward thinking. Where do we want to go as facilitators? What does this mean? And so to kick us off, oh yeah, this was another learning slide. So in order to grow as facilitators, create your own feedback loops. So asking for feedback is for yourself. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's how we grow. Practice active listening to receive the signals. I'll go back to Katie's example from earlier. She could read the room well enough to know that appreciative question or appreciative inquiry in that case or in that moment wasn't well received, and she took something from that. But she had to be open to picking that up in the first place to even learn from it. We heard somebody mention prep meetings, doing a practice tech run with your team beforehand. I think that's a great idea. Also do a quick debrief. Just hang out 5 minutes after the meeting with your facilitation team and jot down your ideas and next steps right that second. And then it's done. And then the other thing is just the transparency and accountability build trust. And so being transparent about the feedback, being transparent about your growth as a facilitator, it just kind of establishes the relationship. It makes it more relational with your participants, that, you know, I'm not some omnipotent being who has some special skills that you don't. I'm just a guy who's trying to lead a room. You know, I mean, ultimately it's part of that. So with that, I want to give you a couple of minutes here to do some personal visioning. And I'm going to turn on some music. I think I have the right song selected. You have to listen carefully to the lyrics in the chorus. You'll hear why. But let's take like 4 or 5 minutes. I'll kind of read the room. Either wherever you are, if you want to walk around, if you want to take some notes, whatever your preferred mode of reflection is, using Evernote. I take notes in my notebook, whatever. I'm going to play some music, and for 4 minutes, we'll just think about, really the guidance is, imagine it's 6 months from now, it's a year from now. Where do you want to be as a facilitator? Where do you want to be as a facilitative leader? Based on what you've been thinking about and what that means to you. So, and I'm not going to police that in any way, so also feel free to interpret that as you will. And we'll come back in about 4 minutes. All right. My fiance asked me to stop playing that song so much at one point, but I think he wasn't fully appreciating that's why we got to fight part. Maybe it's not the heaviest part of the chorus. I want to transition this directly into a conversation about, what does facilitative leadership mean for your community? I already made it mine as well, our community. What does it mean? So let's go back to Mentimeter. It's the same Mentimeter. So if you kept it open, if you have that information, it's still in the chat. I'm going to switch my screen share so that you can see it. All right. So I see a couple of people coming over. Again, here's the information. It is in the chat as well if you need it. And I'm going to advance the slides so that we can get started on this question. In a word, what does a facilitative leadership style contribute to your community and ecosystem? Just kind of in the big picture. Empowerment, inclusivity. And I think I left it where you can contribute more than one answer. Solutions, equity, humility, I like that one. Understanding, connection, listening. Yeah, I think inclusivity at the center is appropriate. Not just because of kind of the theme of today, but I think that's what that easy thing means, making it easy for everybody. Empathy, actions. If anybody for any reason is having problems with the Mentimeter, feel free to throw words in the chat as well. Access, all voices, great. For the sake of time, I'm gonna keep us moving along. What opportunities are there for this group to continue collaborating and supporting each other? Let's think concretely. We've heard of a couple things at a couple different points. I think there's a community of practice in the mix, and I'm sure many others. Any ideas, both opportunities for collaborating and ideas for how you can keep supporting each other in this? I like that first one, share feedback with a partner. The one-on-one relationships and hopefully email exchanges that have occurred. Yeah, continue with that. You have overlapping goals so you can attend and participate in each other's meetings. Absolutely. And I really love having facilitators in the crowd, giving active feedback, being active participants, giving you the eye contact that, you know, reassures you that things are going okay. You can all do that for each other. That's huge. Convening a group of folks who are interested in helping facilitate that. I think that's the community of practice, the CCTT, is that right?
It's a community collaborative.
Community collaborative, right. Thank you. Use resource sharing meeting for breakout groups to follow up on facilitative leadership. Okay, yep. Create a quarterly event. I think that's an awesome idea. Have a regular check-in. Pick a check-in buddy to follow up with. Yeah, that's all great. To that, the quarterly event point, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or if something like this has happened in Tahoe. Excuse my language in advance. It's not, I didn't name them, but they're called fuck up nights. A night at a bar or library or whatever. I think a bar is the ideal location for this kind of night. But it's sharing where we messed up. What were our failures and what did we learn from them? And I think that for a group like this would be kind of the right tone, right? Like, we don't need something super formal necessarily. There's plenty of potential for formal capacity building, but also just checking in with each other. What have you learned lately? What's worked for you? And you don't have to use the F word in advertising if it's not community appropriate. There aren't many communities besides our own professional, somewhat cynical social change community that embraces that. All right, I think this is my last question right now before I ask for some feedback. And then we're gonna close, folks, which it's been a real pleasure working with you. I have really, really enjoyed this. Your engagement, your openness and curiosity and experience, it's all been just a lot of fun. And I'll say that your colleagues in the Spanish version of this training are just as fun and just as curious and just as experienced. So if you don't know them, definitely reach out. But any questions? These can also go in the chat.
Nate, no, Phyllis and I were just chatting when we were in our small group about making sure that we're like there's a way that we can consolidate the information to send out to folks, so we can check in with you about that later.
Definitely. I owe you an email with just all the links in a row. Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, and don't forget, I will send the presentations in comment mode or whatever. So, I mean, really copy slides, whole presentations, whatever is useful. You have my full blessing. Okay. No questions, which is hard to believe, but I think it's more a symptom of Friday morning. How do we follow up with you? Great question. I will flash my contact information at the very end. And this is how you really follow up with me, is right now. If you could give me some feedback, these are the questions you're used to. And then I have one more question at the end. And as people are filling this out, Phyllis or Allison or Caroline, any closing remarks or comments from the Community Foundation side?
My only comment is that you know, I think I'll send an email to this group and the other participants as well if folks are interested in helping support some of the facilitation we do through the foundation and the collaboration. So if folks are wanting opportunities to practice, and I think it would be cool to kind of convene together a community of practice like folks who are interested in facilitating not only collaborative meetings, but obviously meetings within their own organizations or their own lives, and just kind of go through some of the tools that you've shared with us. So Phyllis and Christina and Caroline and I can talk about how to move forward with that.
I think
So
that's a really
I'm
cool
excited
idea.
about that part. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Anything else before I advance the slide? All right, here's just the last one for the day and for the training. And this is a good general indicator. You've probably heard of the Net Promoter Score in one way or another, but just as a general, how likely are you to recommend this experience, this training? Just so I have an idea. And like I said, I'll put up my contact information. I'll transition over there right now. And I'll turn on some music. If anybody is sticking around, we're already a couple of minutes over, so I won't keep you anymore. But again, thank you so much for joining for these 4 sessions. Like Devin says, joining for an hour and a half is a lot. So I appreciate that you did that 4 times on a Friday morning, no less. And yeah, I hope this is just the start of more work in this direction for you all as individuals and as a community. And with that, have a great weekend, everybody. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Nate.
Nate.